Where the English went, they built a house. Where the Germans went, they built a barn. Where the Scots-Irish went, they built a whiskey still. An old Appalachian proverb. A 500-pound woman once ran the most feared moonshine operation in Appalachia. From her bed. The law knew where she was. They just couldn't carry her out. She made whiskey while 3 of her children died. Watched their graves from her window because she couldn't walk. But why did the government chase moonshiners harder than murderers? What does it say when a sick, disabled woman on a mountain becomes a national threat? And who really writes the history? Those who survive, or those who bury the story? My name is Sam, and this is Wild America. Now, to understand moonshine, you've got to go back to where it all kicked off. Number 1, an overview. Moonshine has always lived in the shadows. It came out of hard times, out of hunger and determination. It was made to survive, not for fun or glory. Most people think of outlaws when they hear the word. They picture men running liquor in old cars, dodging the law. Well, that's part of the truth, in later times, but not all of it. You see, moonshine was born the moment the government tried to put a price on drink. When they started taxing alcohol, people started making it in secret. And that's basically where the name comes from. Moonshine. Made by the light of the moon, far from watching eyes. Distilling at night, after all, was necessary as much as it was clever. The stills were hidden in deep woods, up mountains, in the middle of nowhere. The Great Smoky Mountains were perfect for this. Endless ridges, thick trees. No one could find you if you didn't want to be found. The craft itself came from across the ocean. Scots brought their old ways with them in the 1700s. They knew how to turn corn into fire, and they needed to. Life on the frontier was rough. If your crops failed, whiskey kept the family fed. Corn didn't sell for much, but corn liquor did, and moonshiners made it. Bootleggers moved it. That word, bootlegger, goes back to the 1880s. Smugglers hid flasks in their boots. When cars came along, the word grew to mean anyone running liquor, fast and quiet. People also gave moonshine a lot of names. White lightning, stump water, corn liquor, skullcracker, firewater, rot gut. It may not have been fancy or smooth, but it did the job. Alcohol has been around for thousands of years, yes, but few governments tried to control it like America did. You see, after the Revolution, the country was broke. They needed money, so they taxed liquor. And that's when the trouble started. Farmers didn't take it well. They fought back, sometimes with fists, sometimes with fire. They tarred and feathered tacksmen. They burned down stills. In 1791, the anger turned into open rebellion, the Whiskey Rebellion. George Washington had to send troops to put it down, but the moonshine didn't stop. It never has. The Whiskey Rebellion, however, didn't leave much blood behind. Fewer than 15 dead, but the message was clear. And when the fighting broke out in western Pennsylvania, it wasn't just a local problem, it was a test. Could the new country hold itself together? George Washington thought so. He rode at the head of 13,000 militia troops. They marched into frontier land to put it down. The rebellion ended without a real battle. The show of force was enough. It marked a change. The government had teeth, and it was willing to bite. But the rebels got the last word. A few years later, in 1801, Jefferson took office. He and his party tossed out the whiskey tax. The people were glad to see it go. But the peace didn't last. When the Civil War came, the government needed money again. So the liquor tax came back, only this time they came harder. IRS agents and revenuers swept through the hills. Still sites were raided. Shots were fired. The fight turned ugly. But back in Washington's day, moonshiners were folk heroes. They were farmers standing tall against unfair taxes. But after the war, the story changed. People started to see them as outlaws, dangerous men with something to hide. Then came the temperance movement, church groups, Moral reformers, they pushed to ban alcohol entirely. States started to fall in line, passing dry laws one by one. And in 1920, it happened. Nationwide prohibition. To moonshiners, it was a gift. Legal liquor disappeared overnight. The thirst, however, didn't. Demand exploded. You couldn't buy a bottle in the open, but if you knew someone or knew a password, you could find it. In hidden bars, behind false walls, down dark stairs. Speakeasies popped up everywhere. Moonshiners worked around the clock to feed the hunger. And where there's money, there's muscle. Organized crime moved in. Liquor became a business run by gangs, not farmers. The drink changed too. A lot of it was rushed, watered down, made with sugar instead of corn. It wasn't about quality anymore, just profit. For a while there, the moonshiners ruled the night. But in 1933, prohibition ended. And just like that, the black market shrank. Legal alcohol came back, and the old ways started to fade. These days, moonshine lives on, but it's something else now. A relic, a brand, a memory carried in mason jars and tourist shops. But knowing where it came from is one thing. Seeing how it's made, now that's the real story. Number 2, the original moonshine making process. Before we get too deep, let's pause for a bit of old-time lingo. First off, the revenuers were the government men. They were sent to collect liquor taxes and not exactly welcome in the hills. The mash bill was the mix, usually corn, sometimes barley, or rye. The grain base used to make the alcohol. Sugar liquor. That's when they added sugar to the mash to push out more booze, quicker and cheaper. The pot still was where it all began. The mash went in, got heated, and alcohol started to rise. Then came the thump keg, or thumper keg. It caught the vapor and gave it a second run, cleaning it up, making it stronger. And the full rig, the double thumper, still had it all. The pot, the thump, and the coil that cooled the final shine. Now, back then, making moonshine wasn't clean or easy. It was slow, dirty work. As mentioned earlier, most of it happened in the Appalachians, deep in the trees, far from roads or lawmen. They carried corn across rough trails, down into hollers. They needed fresh water to make mash, so they set up by creeks and springs. But the woods had their own problems. Bad weather, animals, and always the risk of being caught. The still had to be built by hand, sometimes out of scrap like metal pots, barrels, copper coils. Nothing fancy, just whatever worked. And it had to be fast, and it had to be hidden. Time was always short, so to stretch the mash, moonshiners started using sugar. It made more alcohol, and faster. But it came with a cost. Sugar liquor burned hotter, and it tasted rougher. The best stuff came from pure corn, cleaner, but not everybody had time for that. The still of choice was the double thumper. One pot, one thump keg, one coil. It was simple but clever. You see, the mash was cooked in the pot. Vapors rolled into the thump. There, they turned back to liquid, then heated again into vapor. That second round made the shine stronger, cleaner too. Then the last stop was the coil, which they called the worm. The vapor cooled down there, turned back into liquid, and that was the final product. Bottled, hidden, hauled off before the law showed up. Also, maybe you've seen those old jugs marked with XXX. That wasn't for show. Each X meant the batch had been run through the still once. XXX meant it had been distilled 3 times. Strong stuff, over 80% alcohol. It was illegal, sure, but that didn't mean it was sloppy. Good moonshiners took pride in what they made. It was for money, for their people, for their place. And now, let's talk about the ones who turned liquor into legend. Number 3, the folk heroes. Some folk became part of moonshine, and these weren't outlaws in the usual sense. No, they were builders, survivors, story makers. Men and women who worked in the dark under trees and stars until their names lived on past their time. First, there's Amos Owens, the cherry bounce king. Born around 1822 in North Carolina, he had no formal schooling. Just a few days of books, then straight to work. At 9, he carried water and chopped trees. 13 years of that gave him enough to buy 100 acres on Cherry Mountain. He was 23, married young. He even paid the judge in brandy. Then he started making a drink folks would remember, Cherry Bounce. It consisted of corn whiskey, cherries, honey, or sugar water. It was sweet, strong, and smooth enough to keep your teeth and knock you off your feet. Amos made good money, enough to buy all of Cherry Mountain. He stayed there the rest of his life. During the Civil War, however, Owens fought for the South. He got caught, did time in Union stockades. Then he came back changed. Swore he'd never pay a cent to the feds for his whiskey, not after Lincoln's tax in 1862. And he didn't, not willingly anyway. Every June he threw a big party, 25 cents at the gate. Food, cherry bounce, dancing, bare-knuckle fights, even gander pulling. And when it was done, he'd bury the cash. Some say jugs of his bounce ended up all the way down the Mississippi River, served on paddle boats from Cincinnati to New Orleans. He even kept a telescope to watch for revenuers. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. He went to prison 3 times, 4 times in court. His last charge was at 68. After that, the still went cold, but folks never forgot his name. And then there was Buck O'Haron. He was born poor in Boonville, 1837, raised on corn and dirt. He learned to make shine early, taught by another farmer. By the time the Civil War hit, Buck was already well known. Moonshiners mostly leaned Confederate, no taxes under that flag. When the war fell apart, many left. But Buck stayed. He kept the stills running, 60 gallons a day. He gave away gallons to soldiers and friends. A big heart in a rough business. But in 1874, one of his stills blew. Fire tore across the land. Buck took it as a sign. He quit the shine and made a soft drink instead. He called it Sunshine. And by 1892, Buck vanished. Just disappeared. No body, no grave. Only a cask found over a century later, marked with BOH. Some say it was his. Others just nod and let the story be. Then there was Ma Walker. She ran her operation in the hills, late 1800s into the early 1900s. Her liquor was clean, strong, and smooth. She was slippery, always a step ahead of the law. No one could pin her down. And then there was Willie Clay Call. He ran Moonshine through the Smoky Mountains in the early 1900s. His shine was strong, real strong. He was faster than the law and proud of it. Call rolled with the Whitecaps, a gang that made trouble and kept their own kind safe. He was a ghost on the road. The law never could pin him down for long. There was also Tom Colvin from Cock County, Tennessee. Big man, quiet, strong as an ox. He was known for 2 things: clean, high-quality liquor and never getting caught. He'd carry gallons through rough mountain trails like it was nothing. Never spilled a drop, never left a trail. And let's not forget about Andy Orr. He was no small-time hustler. He ran Graham County like a man with nothing to lose. Big man, bigger temper, carried a gun like a handshake. Andy didn't hide what he was. He made liquor in the open, sold it fast, and killed when he had to. 7 men didn't walk away. But he didn't blink. Folks feared him, respected him too in a way. He came from a family known for hunting, sharp shooters, hard men, but Andy didn't care for farm work or mining or anything that tied him down. He had his fiddle, his plot hounds, and his stills. That was enough. Making shine paid for the rest. In 1917, the law finally caught him. He died in a prison cell in Tennessee in 1931, but his story still remains in those woods. There was also Charles Folius. Now he was different too. People called him the Whiskey Caveman. He lived up in the North Carolina mountains, built his still inside a cave. The law raided him again and again, but they never found a thing. Folius would eventually disappear into the rock, gone like smoke. Then one day, during a raid, the cave had visitors. Rattlesnakes. Too many to fight. He had two choices, run through them or give himself up. He decided to walk out. Hands up. Alive. His story is still passed down, told around fires. Not because he fought the law, but because he hid from it in a cave full of snakes and made it out. And speaking of caves, let's dig into that even more. Number 4. Cave moonshining. In the Deep South, since moonshining was part of the land, farms had what you needed: corn, barley, apples, grapes, and as mentioned earlier, if the crops didn't sell, folks turned them into liquor. And that liquor paid the bills. But making it was a risk. If you got caught, you got fined, and you'd probably get locked up, sometimes for years. So moonshiners got smart. They moved deep into the woods. They hid their stills in old barns, in dugout pits, even underground. Especially after the Civil War, distillers started using old mine tunnels. They were cool, dark, and hidden from the law. Plus, they had water, clean, cold, always flowing. You needed that water to make good shine. The stills themselves weren't easy to move. Heavy drums, copper pipes, fire pits. You couldn't just pack up and go. So you had to find a place where no one would look. And caves were perfect. In Tennessee alone, more than 90 caves hold signs of old stills or the stories left behind. Some caves were burial sites long ago. Others were mined for saltpeter to make gunpowder. Teachers and preachers once used them to escape the heat. Tourists walk through them now. But long before that, they hid outlaws, rebels, and moonshiners. Now the setup was simple, but not easy. Just inside the cave entrance, they'd build a stone furnace. On it sat a metal cooker filled with mash, corn, barley, water. Next to that, a thumper keg. Then a second barrel full of cold water. A coiled pipe ran through it, twisting like a snake. That was the worm. Steam moved from the mash to the thumper, where solids got filtered out. Then it went through the worm, where it cooled and turned to liquor. Now, moonshiners were clever, but some took a stand out in the open. Number 5. Open rebellion. The law came down hard. The 18th Amendment. No more drinking, no more selling, no more making liquor. From the start, people hated it. Bars shut their doors, bartenders lost their jobs. Whole cities went quiet. But not for long. Breweries were told to make near beer, the weak stuff, barely 0.5% alcohol. It didn't give you any buzz or kick. It was basically foam and water. But brewers didn't go quietly. Some found a way around it. They made malt extract, said it was for baking. They sold it with recipes that told you how to make the perfect loaf. And everybody knew what was really going on. Even the government. Agents raided the breweries. They took the malt. Still, a judge ruled it was legal if used for cooking. So it stayed on the shelves, and folks kept baking at home. Others found their own workarounds. Some got licensed as pharmacists. That let them sell alcohol for medicinal use. Hardware stores stocked distillery parts out in the open. Libraries had books that explained how to make gin in your tub, and people did just that. Bathtub gin. It was rough, it was risky, but it worked. The church didn't stay out of it either. Wine was still allowed for religious reasons. So grape juice kits came with little warnings. Don't let it sit too long. It might turn into wine. Of course, that's exactly what people did. And in the South, it wasn't only about the drink. It was about the government. Washington, again, pushing laws down people's throats. For many, the Civil War was still a fresh wound. And this felt like more of the same. Take Mobile, Alabama. They'd already had state-level prohibition in 1909, but the city pushed back. Peacefully, at first. The mayor, who also owned a brewery, went to the Capitol to speak out. The president of the Bank of Mobile even said the city might secede from the state if the ban stayed. And it didn't end there. Mobile became a hub for smuggling. It had the Gulf. It had ships. So did New Orleans, Houston, and Tampa. Booze flowed in. Cops tried to stop it. Some got paid off. Others got shot. Crime went up. So did tension. By 1923, the Mobile Register was full of stories, shootouts, raids, bribes. That year, federal agents seized $100,000 worth of liquor, which is equivalent to almost $1.9 million today. Scotch, cognac, champagne. They needed almost every truck in the city just to haul it all away. The New York Times picked up the story. Mobile was in the spotlight for all the wrong reasons. The local paper said it plain. The city had become a national shame. Not only did the people break law, but they rejected it outright, out in the open, and they weren't sorry. And now, let's introduce you to the moonshiner the law couldn't catch. Not without blood. Number 6. The Fall of Hut Amarine. They hunted him for years. Hut Amarine, moonshiner, outlaw. A name spoken low in the hills of East Tennessee. Folks said he ran the Smokies, knew every ridge, every hollow, every trail that winded into the woods and vanished. His still was somewhere deep in Blount County, near the foot of the Big Smokies, close to the Carolina line. No one knew exactly where. Just that if you found him, you'd better be ready to shoot. The law had tried, more than once. You see, in 1877, the hills got meaner. The government had had enough of the backwoods stills. So Washington sent word, "Stop the whiskey or we'll come take it down ourselves." Green B. Raum, a Union general turned taxman, now ran the Bureau of Internal Revenue. He saw the numbers: 3,000 illegal stills in the southern Appalachians, bleeding the country of $2.5 million a year. That was money the government meant to collect. So Congress opened its wallet, deputies were hired, and the raids began. They put General Joseph A. Cooper in charge down in East Tennessee. He was another Civil War vet. He was from Knoxville, and he didn't waste time. When some of his men got jumped in the woods, he took it personal. He declared war on the moonshiners and sent his men out across the mountains. Dozens of stills got smashed. Fires were put out. Barrels were cracked open and dumped. For a while anyway, the agents had their tricks. They looked for footpaths beaten into the dirt, smoke from hidden fires, the sound of water, soft water, clean and cold, best for whiskey. They even followed feral hogs, fat off the mash. But mostly, they listened. Neighbors talked, sometimes even kin. That kind of betrayal bred suspicion. Outsiders were watched. Everybody could be a revenuer. And that's how they got wind of Hut Amarine. Cooper heard that Hut ran a still out in Blount County near the line with North Carolina, and that Hut wasn't just another bootlegger. He was the big one, according to Cooper's son. Amarine was chief of the Smoky Mountain Operators and was one of the most daring outlaws in the Union. We were well aware of the fact that when we found him, we would have trouble, but we had plenty of officers who were willing and anxious to meet him. Now, Hut was born in 1838. Local boy, his father, George, ran an ironworks in Miller's Cove. Hut, real name Eli Hutzel, joined the Union Cavalry in 1863. He came in as a private, left as a sergeant. When the war ended, he married Eliza Jane Waters and settled down in the Cove. On paper, he was a farm laborer. Off paper, he made whiskey, the good kind. Hut lived his life in the hollows, watched by the law, trusted by few, respected by many, and always just out of reach. Then on August 6, 1878, a squad of 6 men went in. They had a guide who knew the mountain paths. At 3 a.m. on the 8th, they reached the still. It sat in a shadowy hollow, surrounded by trees. It was cold and quiet, and then the rifles cracked. Hut was waiting. He had 3 men with him. Shots fired in the dark. One officer, Snyder, caught a bullet in the wrist. It ruined his hand. The posse pulled back. Too risky to stay. But the hunt wasn't over. Collector Cooper sent 10 more men. They left Knoxville at night, rode hard, then marched 5 miles on foot. At 10 minutes to 4 the next morning, they arrived. They moved slow, split into pairs, watching every tree. But the still was empty. Cold fire pits, no sign of life. Then a voice from the hill, "Surrender! Hands up!" No time to think. Gunfire tore through the trees. Cooper's brother, John, fell beside him. 2 shots in the chest. He died the next night. They never caught the shooters. But they burned the still to the ground before leaving. And that was the last raid. Years passed. Hutt disappeared. Some said he was in Texas. Others thought he went west for good. But then came the letter. Eli Hutzel. Hutt Amarine died in Indian Territory, November 4th, 1891. He never came back to Tennessee. People remembered him, though, as an outlaw, sure, but also as a man who stood by his friends. Generous, some said. Could have lived another kind of life if he'd wanted. Could have done good. But now he's gone. And like most who die far from home, his story slips into the dirt with him. By 1899, folks still remembered him. The Knoxville Sentinel wrote him up. Medium height, stocky, dark skin, and darker eyes. Sharp, beard like coal smoke. Never had much schooling, but quick on his feet. Kept company with rough men, drinkers, fighters, drifters. But now, come meet the woman who was too big to be taken down the mountain. Literally. Number 7. Melungeon Queen. They say she was born in 1824, somewhere in the hills above Sneedville, Tennessee, on a ridge called Newman's. That's Melungeon country, rough land, quiet people, hard lives. Folks up there didn't ask much from the outside world. They made do. They kept to themselves. And Mahala was one of them. She was a big woman, not just in body, though that too. Over 500 pounds, some said, but big in presence, big in spirit. She lived on top of a mountain where the paths ran steep and narrow. And there, in that crooked little cabin, she made whiskey, smooth, clean, strong liquor. And word got around. If you wanted the best shine in Appalachia, you went to Mahala Mullins. If you could find your way up. She was born into a people who were mixed, black, white, indigenous. That made life harder. Outsiders didn't understand. They stared, they judged, they wrote wild stories. Some called her a curiosity, some called her a criminal. But to her own, she was something else. She was a survivor. You see, Mahala didn't set out to be a legend. She started like anyone else, growing what she could, getting by. But the whiskey business called, and she answered. She built it up, bottle by bottle. Folks came from all over, braving that climb for a taste. She'd greet them from the porch, laugh that low, slow laugh, and pour them something that burned just right. The law tried to shut her down. Revenuers, sheriffs, deputies, they all came. Some made it up the mountain, but none got her down. They'd show up, look around, see her sitting there in the doorway. And that was that. Too big to carry. Too stubborn to move. One deputy said it plain. Catchable, but not fetchable. That line stuck. Some tales say she once wrestled 30 men and sold them all whiskey after. Others say she just smiled as the law stood there, helpless. Whatever the truth may be, she lived long enough to see her name in papers far beyond Tennessee. Even when she died, the headlines kept her myth alive. Not too big for death, one read. Famous moonshiner dead, defied law officers from a mountaintop. But behind the headlines there was still a woman, still Mahala, still that quiet strength tucked deep in the hills where the fog hangs low and the stories run long. During her life, Mahala Mullins didn't get to shape her own story. Others did that for her. Preachers, reporters, outsiders with pens and judgments. One missionary, C.H. Humble, called her whiskey trade a curse brought to her own door. A journalist named Paul Converse wrote more about the feuds around her family than the woman herself. Even her name got lost in the noise. Some called her Mary, others Betsy or Haley. The spelling changed with the teller. She lived in a place most people couldn't find unless they were looking. The Vardy Valley, tucked deep in the folds of the mountains where the roads twist like roots and the air stays quiet. And that's where Druanna Williams Overbay lives now. She's kin to Mahala, knows the land, knows the stories. She keeps them alive. Druanna stands watch over what's left of the old world. The cabin Mahala once lived in, however, is not where it used to be. The original home sat up high on Newman's Ridge, located in a dip near Druanna's family land. When they moved it, they did it slow, piece by piece, towed it down into the valley, rebuilt it the same way it once stood. In her heyday, nevertheless, Mahala made smooth, strong, and flavored whiskey with apples from the nearby orchards. It was this that got people to come from all around, chasing the taste. It made her stand out, gave her a kind of respect. It was that business built the house that stands today. 2 floors, big porch, a wide front room, and 2 spaces below. It wasn't her first house, though. The first one burned. Confederate soldiers lit the fire. They didn't like that she backed the Union. In her new home, however, Mahal shared meals in her beloved keeping room. The space is simple, full of old things: china, a spinning wheel, a chamber pot, once given to her daughter as a joke. She especially loved Blue Flow china. And when her grandkids left home, they'd send her more. Then there were narrow, creaking stairs that lead to the upper floor. That's where the children slept, somewhere between 13 and 20 of them. Most agree on 15. This room doubled as their school. You see, the valley didn't have a schoolhouse until 1899, and even if it had, Melungeon kids weren't allowed in. The law didn't see them as white, didn't count them as free. So they learned where they could, how they could, and Mahala kept the fire burning. Mahala Mullins may have felt a strong pull toward the Cherokee. You see, Overbay, who studied her life, thinks her father Solomon might have tried to register with the U.S. government as Cherokee. If so, it wasn't just for identity. It would have meant a shot at reparations, maybe some money for the land their people lost. However, no one's found proof of Solomon's application online, but her son Reuben's record still exists. He fought hard for recognition, letters, appeals, arguments. It dragged on for years. The government turned him down, however, and that rejection might have shaped Mahala's defiance. Might have been why she refused to pay taxes on her liquor. "They ain't getting a damn dime of my money," Overbay said, imagining her voice. "They owe me. I'm not paying them." She spent her last years mostly in one room, downstairs. A small bedroom with a 4-poster bed, a simple mantel. That's where she made her whiskey. That's where she sold it. And that's where she died. Her health got worse with time. Some folks joked about her size. They didn't know she was suffering from elephantiasis, a brutal disease that left her swollen, pained, and unable to walk. Some say she longed for the sheriff to arrest her just to see the world beyond the mountain one last time. She outlived her husband, lost 3 children too. One killed in a fight, one lynched, and one died in the war. She buried them close, just beyond the window. Once she couldn't leave her bed, she could still see them. That mattered to her. She died in 1898. They say she's buried outside the cabin on Newman's Ridge with the rest of her family. No one agrees how it happened. Some say they built a coffin around her bed, carried the whole thing outside. Others claim she was wrapped in a quilt and pushed out the door. Even after death, Mahala was 2 stories at once. The papers ran a photo of her in bed, thin, sick, her body worn down. But her family kept other pictures. She's dressed well in those. Posed, calm, surrounded by loved ones. And in those images, you see something else. Maybe not how the world saw her, but maybe how she saw herself. And in the end, they called it crime. Yet, moonshiners called it survival. And when the law came knocking, they didn't run. In Mahala's case, she just stayed in her chair and dared the law to move her. So sometimes resistance doesn't look like a gunfight. Sometimes it looks like a woman too big to drag away, and too proud to pay a system that never paid her back.